Hello, and welcome to the next part of our Chapter a Day series working through the book of Genesis. Today we find ourselves at Genesis chapter 31. If you've been following with us as we've been going through the book chapter by chapter, you're likely beginning to see the themes that are coming through the book, the pictures that we are supposed to take of the character of God, of our own character as human beings, both in our intended purpose as the image and likeness of God displaying his character to the created universe, and also our situation as slaves to sin. We've been following the journey of a family that God called out and gave a particular purpose and promise to. We've walked along with Abram and Sarai on the journey from Haran down into Canaan. We saw the promise that God gave them and how he eventually changed their name to Abraham and Sarah. And how after 25 years of facing what seemed to be human circumstances that were beyond their control, they saw God fulfill his promise. We then followed his son, Isaac, and his wife, Rebekah. And now we are with their son, Jacob. We've seen Jacob live up to his name as one who comes behind and trips someone up, as a trickster, as a manipulator trying to get his own way, trying to take hold of that which was promised to him by God, but he's trying to do it by his own means. And then we followed him when he met a man who was more deceptive and more conniving than he was, his uncle and his father-in-law, Laban. We've seen the journey that he's been on. We've seen the interactions in his own family. Now we see him as he prepares to go home. So let's enter into the chapter and see what the Lord has for us. Genesis 31, starting at verse 1. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So we have this scenario that's shaping up in the story. Jacob has been living now for about 20 years with his uncle and father-in-law Laban. So we have Jacob and we have Laban. And if you will recall, when Jacob went to Laban, Jacob basically came with nothing. He came running from his brother Esau, and he came to Laban for shelter, but also under the pretext of coming seeking a wife. Laban provides for him Leah and Rachel. And Jacob has to work 7 years for each of them. So for a total of 14 years, he was paying off the bride price for his 2 wives. The wife that he had wanted and the wife that he had received. Jacob continued to live with Laban, and over the next 6 years, he has served him. And as we know from the previous chapter, the Lord has blessed the work of Jacob. No matter how Laban has tried to manipulate things to prevent Jacob from gaining anything, basically trying to ensure that Jacob would always be indebted to him, always be stuck serving him, causing Laban to become more wealthy at Jacob's expense, we see how God works. And we see how the Lord provides and the Lord protects. And we'll see this as we continue through this chapter, the importance, the fact that the Lord provides and the Lord protects. So the Lord told Jacob that he would look after him. When Jacob was laying in the dust with his head on a pillow with nothing, running from his brother, basically looking like he was going to lose everything that he had tried to gain, the Lord spoke to him and gave him his promise. The promise that he had given to Abraham, the promise he had given to Isaac, he then bestowed on Jacob. So practically speaking, the Lord had made it so that no matter what happened, Jacob always grew in wealth. So he has become wealthy. And that wealth is generally in the terms of livestock. Now, everything that Jacob has is something that Laban doesn't have. So what Jacob is hearing, he's beginning to hear that Laban's sons are saying, look, more and more of what we're producing is going to Jacob. It's Jacob's property. So everything that our dad is not able to keep for himself is part of the inheritance that we're not going to get. So the sons of Laban are beginning to become upset with Jacob. And Jacob knows that Laban isn't pleased with him. Laban is more obvious in his manipulation. And Laban is probably getting frustrated at the fact that no matter what he does to try to ensure that Jacob doesn't benefit, Jacob still benefits because the Lord provides. So when Laban told Jacob, from the flocks, because of all your years of service, any animals that are born that are spotted or striped or black, you can have those. But before Jacob has a chance to go and search through the flock, Laban has his son gather all those out of the flock, leaving only the ones that aren't spotted or striped or black, and has them taken a 3 days journey away and kept in a separate flock that Jacob doesn't know about. But the Lord still causes the offspring to be produced to meet the requirements that Laban has put in place, so that Jacob continues to grow in wealth. So now we'll see what Jacob is going to do. He knows that the tide is turned for him. Verse 4, so Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, or mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. So we see that God has been providing for him, protecting him, and now God has spoken to him through a dream, through an angelic messenger, and he has told him, I am with you. I am with you, and it's time to come back to the land of promise. It's time to return to the land. Now, of course, Jacob is explaining this to his 2 wives, But remember that they are by blood tied to Laban. So let's see what their reaction is. Verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do." So we get an insight here of the family life of Laban, because Rachel and Leah, when they look at the situation, they go, look, Laban, he sold us. He sold us, and what you earned for him, he squandered it away. So he sold us. Disowned us, because the bride price is usually intended to help the bride. Well, he squandered it. So there's nothing left for them. And what Laban possesses, it's going to go to his sons. There's nothing left for them. And they're looking at it and going, and everything that's happened, all the good wealth belongs to Jacob, therefore belongs to them as his wives and belongs to their children. So why would we stay here? We have no reason to stay. So their allegiance is with Jacob. Their allegiance is with Jacob. So it's time for Jacob to make his plan. And what we're going to see here is that Jacob is still on the journey of trusting in the promise and casting off his old nature. Verse 17, so Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired at Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan, his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates, and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. So what do we see happen here? Laban has gone off to shear his sheep. In all likelihood, he's gone off to the flocks that were hidden away, to those flocks that were put a 3 days journey away so that Jacob wouldn't know about them. And while he's gone off to shear his sheep, Jacob is using this opportunity to take everything he has, and he's going to run. So he is trying to trick Laban one more time. One more deception. So likely a messenger has gone to travel to Laban to tell Laban what has gone on, because he's off shearing, and that would actually be a lengthy process, the shearing of the sheep. There's often be feasts associated with it and celebrations. So he's off doing that. By the time this messenger gets to him, it's been 3 days since Jacob's taken off. But Laban is furious. Laban views Jacob's leaving as a huge loss for him. He's lost the grandchildren, which he views as his property. He has lost his daughters, which he views as his property. He's lost all of Jacob's possessions, which Laban, though he may have said he's given to Jacob, had no intention of Jacob taking them. As far as Laban was concerned, Jacob would be stuck with him, and he would have all Jacob's possessions really as his own. So now he has to track down Jacob. And so he is chasing hard after him. He's gathered together his household servants and he is chasing down Jacob. And he finally catches up with them in the hill country of Gilead, and he's about to overtake him. And then we see in verse 24, but God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So what do we see? We have Jacob figuring his one more deception is going to get him free of Laban and enable him to go home. But Laban pursues. But God protects. God intervenes. Just as Laban is now less than a day's journey from catching up with Jacob and his family, because of course it is far easier to travel quickly with just a group of armed men than it is to travel with livestock and children and everything else, servants. But God intervenes, because you see, this goes back to that key point. It's about the promise. God has made a promise to Jacob that he is now part of that bigger promise, the promise of God saying that he is going to build a great nation through this line that will become nations, that will give birth to kings, that God will bless this nation and make them a blessing, that those who bless this nation will be blessed, and those who dishonor this nation God will curse, and through this line all the nations of the earth will be blessed. See, this goes back to the promise. We've never walked away from the promise. So in order for the promise to be fulfilled, Jacob is under the Lord's protection. So verse 25, and Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. So we have Laban. It's interesting to see Laban's reaction as Laban interacts with Jacob. Do you notice that use of the word that pops up several times? You tricked me. Laban, who is consistently sought to deceive, rebukes Jacob for deception. So Laban rebukes Jacob for his deception, for his trickery, which is true. The irony is Laban is the master at this. Even now, Laban is probably trying to think of a way that he can get around God's protection. Because originally he was probably planning simply to sweep down upon them and take back what he considered his. But now he knows that God is intervening. God is present. So he rebukes Jacob. And he still, in a way to intimidate Jacob, says, it's within my power to do you harm. But, notice in verse 29, the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away because you have longed greatly for your father's house. So Laban isn't going to say Jacob is leaving because of how miserable he treated him. He says, I understand your God has told me not to say anything good or bad to you, and you are obviously leaving because you miss your family. That's why you're leaving. But then he poses the state question to him, but why did you steal my gods? And that's something that popped up earlier in the chapter as they're preparing to leave, which is an interesting thing to note. We have the theft of idols. This is important because it reveals, again, a bit more about the culture of this people group. It gives us a glimpse into Rachel and who she is. Remember, and it's important for us not to forget this as we read through Old Testament characters, particularly as we read through the characters in the book of Genesis, that these people did not have the complete Word of God from which to understand fully who God is, his character, his intentions, his plans, his history of the things he's accomplished. They didn't have that. Abraham is visited by God, and God introduces himself to Abraham, calls him out, and begins to reveal himself to Abraham and also to his descendants. But for the majority of the people around, while they would know of, likely, God, much of this culture was polytheistic. Ur of the Chaldees was a polytheistic city-state. Haran was a polytheistic community. There were many gods thought of and worshipped and represented through images in the area where Laban lived. And Laban had idols, representations of his household gods. And in that culture, your idols gave you the representation of the gods that gave you protection and provided for you, provide and protect where you were. So Rachel is probably thinking, I'm leaving this land and I'm traveling to the land of my husband. In order to be safe, I need to bring our household gods with me. I need to bring them with me so that I'll have their protection and provision where I'm going. Rachel has not yet entered into that covenant relationship that Jacob has with Yahweh, with Elohim, with El Shaddai. Does not have that yet. So for her, it's part of her security. I'm going to take the family idols with us. So those gods will follow us and be present with us, and I can reach out to them in the new land. Jacob is oblivious to this. So when Laban poses the question to Jacob, okay, so I understand why you're going to leave, and I'm disappointed in you, and you were deceiving me, but my last issue is, why did you steal my gods? And now we see the response. Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. That's why I left the way I did. I'm just telling you, I left the way I did because I thought if I told you I'm leaving, you'd say, okay, you can go, but you can't have your daughters, you can't keep your grandchildren. You go as you came. You don't keep anything with you. And then he continues to say, anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. It's interesting. It shows the limit of the knowledge Jacob has of his own wives. A limit of the knowledge he has. She, Rachel, is deceiving Jacob. In some ways, they demonstrate similarities of human frailty. That she has taken them and has not told her husband anything about it. She's hidden them away. Maybe she knows that he worships a different God, so he may not be pleased, but she's still going to protect herself and keep these. So Jacob makes the bold statement that you search through everything that we have, and if anybody you find in any of our people's possessions, our servants, our helpers, if you find those idols, you can kill that person. Verse 33. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. We see the deceptive quality of Rachel in this. Rachel wants to keep these idols, these representations of her family's gods. So what does she do? She puts them under a camel saddle, sits on it, and when her father comes in searching her tent, she says, I'm sorry, I can't get up right now. I'm having my menstrual period. And so her father goes, oh, okay, you stay there. I'll just look around, not realizing that she's trying to deceive him. She has learned well from her father. She has come up with a lie to deceive him, to keep these idols that she wants to hold on to. So he doesn't find them. Now we watch Jacob's response here. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Jacob makes a powerful statement here. For the first time, we see Jacob being honest. He says, look, I came to you. I worked hard for you. I did what you required me to do. He earned, instead of trying to trick or manipulate, he earned what he received. God was providing, God was blessing, but Jacob was doing work. And he rebukes Laban at this point. He says, look at the way this has gone. Look at how you've deceived me. Look at how you've tried to change things and manipulate them. And even now, Laban, I know that you would have come here and you would have taken everything from me except that the God of my father, the God of my grandfather, had prevented you. Because God saw my affliction. God saw how you were treating me, and God intervened. God protects. God provides. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. It's important to note here the condition of the heart. It's important to see this. A hard heart. Even though Jacob has now made an honest statement to Laban, even though Jacob has laid out exactly how Laban has acted, seeking to deceive and to manipulate, Laban does not repent. The hard heart is blind. Laban does not repent for anything he has done. He doesn't say, "You're right, Jacob, I misused you. You're right, I deceived you about your wife. You're right, I tried to swindle you out of your wages." Instead, he makes the bold proclamation back to Jacob saying, "Look, even now, everything you have is mine. Your wives, mine. Your children are my grandchildren, they're mine. Your servants, they're mine. All the livestock we see spread out around us, even now, it's all mine. You only have it because I permit it. You only have it because I permit it." Laban rejects God's work. Laban takes God's credit. Laban says, "You only have these things because of me. Even now they're mine. So as you leave with what you're going to leave with, know that it's because of me that you have it." Laban rejects God's work. Even though Jacob has just said, "Because my God saw the affliction that I was under, that's why he has helped me." But they need to come to a solution. So this is what they come to. Verse 44, "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Sharaduatha, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Galeed and Mizpah. For he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of each other's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." So while Laban rejects God's work, Laban, interestingly, calls on God's justice. They set up a marker, and Laban says, "I am going to call on your God, that your God would watch between you and me. So though I can't watch you and you can't watch me, we are both calling on your God that he will hold either of us accountable, that your God will hold you accountable, Jacob, for how you treat my daughters, my grandchildren." Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me, to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country, and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Laban departed and returned home. So we end this section with a covenant being made. A covenant being made between Laban and Jacob. They set up a marker, and they say this marker becomes the dividing post, the watch post. Beside it being a reminder a witness of the covenant that they have made before God, it is also a watch post. So Laban says, I will never go past this post in the direction to the land you're returning to. And Jacob, you can never come past this post toward me. So I know there won't be some day where you're going to come and try to attack me and take advantage of me, and you can know that I will never come after you to try to take back these possessions that are mine, as Laban had said. And so they make this covenant together. And they have this marker which in the generations to come will serve as that point where they made witness and set a boundary line between the two. God is returning Jacob to the land. And it's interesting, so though this is done by Laban for his own self-preservation and protection, it is a way of saying to Jacob, your place is in the land of promise. You have no place back here. There is no place in Haran for you. You and your wives and your children need to return to the land of promise. Sometimes as we are going through life and we're interacting with the world, we can lose sight of the Lord who provides and protects. We can fall back as Jacob did on his own means and trying one more deception to get away. We can be in communication with those, or sometimes even in our own state, where our hard heart is blind to what God is doing, rejecting God's work, thinking that it's our work. But God provides and He protects and He takes us where He wants us to be. He wants us separated to Him. And so the witness is placed there. The watch post, don't go back. There's nothing back there for you anymore. There's nothing back there for you. From now on, it's forward to the land, to the promise. Don't go back. Just as Abraham would never go back to Haran, Jacob now needs to see that watch post and not go back. I hope this has given you something to think about, to meditate on today. As always, we'd love to hear from you, any comments that you have. And if this blesses you, please share it with somebody else. Thank you, and God bless you.